In 1794, just a few years after breaking free from Britain, the United States faced a dangerous question. What happens when Americans refuse to obey American law? George Washington, revered as a reluctant leader, a symbol of restraint, made a decision no president has ever repeated. He personally led troops to confront American citizens. This wasn't a foreign war. It wasn't a revolution. It was the first and only time a sitting U.S. president used the national army against Americans. And it permanently defined what federal power would mean in a democracy. In the early 1790s, the United States was less a nation than an experiment. The Constitution was new. The federal government was weak. National authority existed mostly on paper. Most people didn't think of themselves as Americans. They were Virginians, Pennsylvanians, farmers, veterans, frontiersmen, and they deeply distrusted centralized power. For many, the revolution hadn't been fought to create a strong government, but to escape one. George Washington understood this fear better than anyone. He had resigned power after the war, shocking the world. He accepted the presidency reluctantly, believing restraint, not force, was the soul of Republican leadership. But governing revealed a brutal reality. Ideals didn't pay debts. The new nation was drowning in Revolutionary War loans. Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton proposed a solution: an excise tax on distilled spirits, especially whiskey. On paper, it made sense. In practice, it struck at the heart of frontier life. For Western farmers, whiskey wasn't a luxury, it was currency, medicine, transportation. Grain was easier to ship as alcohol than as crops. The tax felt distant, unfair, imposed by elites who didn't understand frontier survival. Resistance began quietly, then violently. Tax collectors were harassed, beaten, tarred, and driven out. Federal law was openly mocked, and the question Washington had hoped to avoid became unavoidable. Could the United States enforce its own laws without becoming the tyranny it had just escaped? By 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion was no longer symbolic defiance. It was organized resistance. Armed groups shut down courts. Federal authority vanished across western Pennsylvania. To Washington, this wasn't merely a tax dispute. It was a test of whether the Constitution meant anything at all. The Articles of Confederation had already failed because the federal government lacked enforcement power. If this rebellion succeeded, the Constitution could meet the same fate. Still, Washington hesitated. He tried proclamations, warnings, negotiations. None worked. Behind closed doors, a deeper fear grew. If the government backed down now, every future law would be optional. So Washington made a decision that contradicted his own image. He invoked the Militia Acts. He assembled nearly 13,000 troops, larger than many Revolutionary War armies. And then he did something no one expected. He didn't send the army. He led it. At 62 years old, George Washington mounted a horse and rode at the head of a federal force towards American civilians. Not as a conqueror, not as a tyrant, but as a statement. The message was unmistakable. This government would not rule by fear, but it would not tolerate armed defiance either. Ironically, the army never had to fight. The sheer presence of federal power ended the rebellion. Leaders fled. Resistance collapsed. No battles, no mass executions. Power had been asserted without bloodshed. But the precedent had been set forever. Washington's action worked, but at a cost. Many Americans were unsettled. Some felt betrayed. Had the revolution replaced one distant authority with another? Washington himself seemed to understand the danger. He never repeated the act. No future president has ever personally led troops against civilians again. But the deeper legacy endured. The Whiskey Rebellion established a critical principle. In the United States, law will be enforced by civilian authority, backed by force only as a last resort. It also revealed Washington's most misunderstood trait. He wasn't merely a symbol of unity. He was a guardian of boundaries. He understood that liberty without order dissolves into chaos, and order without restraint collapses into tyranny. By stepping forward once, he ensured no president would need to do so lightly again. In a paradox only history could produce, America's first act of domestic military enforcement became the reason it almost never happens. Can a democracy survive if laws are optional? When does resistance become rebellion? Is the use of force ever compatible with freedom? Was Washington protecting liberty or redefining it? This story isn't about attacks. It's about the moment America decided what kind of nation it would be. If this episode changed how you see George Washington, subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden decisions behind American history.